Trinidad's Sham G brings you a radio show like no other. Step into the Bollywood Zone, the Indian music industry's biggest hits. You've just gotta hear this show. Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. exclusively in Toronto on Shabnam Radio.
So you own a business, have an event you want people to know about. You want to spread the word to as many people as possible that your product or service exists. Call AdWorks International. AdWorks is an advertising agency which utilizes professionals in radio, television, and print advertising to help you get your company's message across. Your ad will be noticed by more people, more quickly. AdWorks from concept to completion will deliver an ad that works. AdWorks International. Call 416-832-7293.
Join us on Shabnam Radio this Saturday, September 24th from 1 to 4 p.m. for a special interview with Mr. Aubrey Norton, leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the Parliamentary Opposition in Guyana. You can listen on 770 AM WTOR, www.shabnamradio.com, or simply dial 647-872-4900. That's this Saturday, a live in-person interview with Mr. Aubrey Norton, leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the Parliamentary Opposition in Guyana. September 24th from 1 to 4 p.m. Hosted by yours truly, Richard Aziz. Well, we are here, Shabnam Radio, and a Saturday. Good afternoon, those of you joining us for the first time. We say hello, and of course, we know we have quite a few new listeners as the PNC and the APNU and AFC coalition. They're all listening. They have a wide listenership, especially in North America, and we will be addressing them. And again, guys, I want to give out the telephone number. So we will be doing this interview today. Telephone number to reach us at the studio. Only when we say we can take your calls, you would call. And if you choose to call, we ask you to be short and please give us your name, first name. We don't have to get your last name and all that, but of course, be respectful to our guests and this station. My guest today is Mr. Aubrey C. Norton, the leader of the People's National Congress Reform, PNCR. He was elected to the position in December 2021. Mr. Norton is also the leader of the official opposition of the APNU and the AFC coalition in Guyana Parliament. Mr. Norton has a long and distinguished career in politics. His involvement in politics began with political youth work since 1972, where he was a member of the Young Socialist Movement, YSM, youth arm of the People's National Congress Reform. He thereafter served in many executive positions in the YSM. He was also the General Secretary of the People's National Congress, PNC. Aubrey Norton also has more than 25 years' experience in foreign policy formulation and implementation. He served in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, providing foreign policy advice on United Nations and all UN-related institutions and non-aligned movement, the Commonwealth, Europe, and the environment. He has a diploma in political science from the Julio Antonio Mela College in Cuba and graduated from the University of the Guyana, UG, with Bachelor of Social Science, Political Science with honors. He earned his Master of Arts in International Relations from the University of Kent of Canterbury in the United Kingdom in 1994. I want to say welcome to Mr. Norton. Welcome to the program. Welcome to Toronto.
Thanks for having me and thanks for your welcome. I want to say a very good afternoon to your listening public and hope we can have a meaningful exchange on issues of relevance to Guyana and the Caribbean if necessary.
Well, first of all, I want to ask you, what made it, what's your purpose, your mission on this journey?
Essentially, I'm here because there are Guyanese in the diaspora. And as the leader of a political party and the leader of the coalition, when I was campaigning, I promised to be in contact with all Guyanese wherever they are. We have here in Canada the chapters of the People's National Congress Reform. I'm here to meet the members and to attend a function in which we will meet the wider community. So I would say this is a kind of a outreach into the diaspora to build relations and continue to network in the interests of the APNUFC and Guyana in general.
Would this trip see you going to the United States also to engage?
Yes, I'm going to the United States to engage, but that has become a reality because there were difficulties getting back home in the time I wanted to get back home. And so to get back home quick, I have to go to the United States. And once I'm going there, it doesn't make any sense not meeting people. So we'll meet people and then I'll proceed to Guyana next week.
Well, getting into the interview, you have been on making headlines for the past few months indeed. If you would summarize for us some of your activities that a lot of Guyanese who have been reading headlines would like to hear. One, I know it was an issue where many occasions, at least two of them I read, where you refused to shake the hands of the political leader and the president of the Corporate Republic, Dr. Irfan Ali. Also, the situation with the parliament. I want to get those issues addressed quickly, and if you could explain in your words or explain to the listening audience how that came to be.
Well, first of all, I've said from the inception, I will represent the unrepresented in Guyana and all Guyanese as well. Now, this issue emerged because a number of issues were placed on the table, among them discrimination against African Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese and indigenous people who support the APNUFC. I'm of the view that a government should treat all as equal. And to the extent that they haven't been doing that, I'd said in the public domain that it needs to be addressed. And there can only be meaningful consultation if these critical issues affecting constituencies are addressed. It is in that context I said I'm not prepared to shake the president's hand as if things are normal when things aren't. We have a situation in Guyana where only in today's paper I read from here that Guyanese would have, the headlines in the Guyana Chronicle read, $64 billion in the pocket of Guyanese. Now I live in Guyana. I know the reality. The cost of living is spiraling out of control. I know the reality. The reality is a small group of PPP elite, friends and family are benefiting, but the mass of Guyanese, regardless of ethnicity, are not benefiting. And for me, if one is talking about an oil and gas sector, that sector will only be useful to us if it is improving the lives of all Guyanese. And to the extent that it tends to put the resources in the hands of the few at the expense of the majority of people at all levels of the society, then I do not believe we should be boasting about an oil and gas sector and about governance. May I also add, governance in Guyana has deteriorated. There is little or no transparency. There's little or no accountability. And when it comes to equity, it's worse. And so, for us in the APNUAFC and for Guyanese who care, there is little or no sense going through the facade or the formality of shaking hands at diplomatic receptions and in the public domain when the critical issues that affect the Guyanese people are not being dealt with. Like I said, I'm prepared to shake anyone's hand, but that handshake will come when we begin to address the critical issues in Guyana. I want to point out that every diplomatic mission in Guyana, most Guyanese believe that there should be a clean voters list. The statistics will tell you the story. Guyana has a population of 750,000 people. At the end of this last registration, 684,000 people are on the voters list. The Ministry of Education is saying that there are about 250,000 children. If you have 250,000 children and your list of electors will be 684,000, unless children are on that list, then it doesn't make sense. Now, every organization the OAS, CARICOM, the Americans, the Canadians, the British, all of them said at the end of the last elections that there is need for a clean list. The only people holding on to this issue is the PPP. Now let us recall that when the PPP lost in 2015, they called for the removal of Steve Sturridge Bally. And they called for new registration and a clean voters list. At the time, they probably didn't anticipate they will be back in government by 2020. Now in 2022, we are making the same call and the government is saying no to it. What do you have to hide? Why would you not want a clean list that reflects the population? A country can only consider itself to be democratic if the list that is going to the elections is reflective of the population. And if it fails to reflect the population, then you create the conditions for the very irregularities you claim to be fighting. You are creating the conditions for tensions again after the next election. We are of the view that we need a clean list and we need to put biometrics in place. Kenya just had elections with biometrics and there's an improved situation. Why would any political party not want to have a situation where when you go to vote, you put your thumb and the biometric machine will establish if you are the person or not? To me, if you don't want that, you don't want transparency, you don't want accountability, you are signaling that you are not good intentioned.
Well, let's just pause for a minute there. Going back, you said a lot indeed. And coming back to the issue of not being equal and equal across the board. Your government, most of your party, would you agree are Afro-Guyanese?
Yes, I do agree.
I want to ask you this. Are you a racist?
No, I'm not. And I go past saying I'm not a racist. I say this first of all. I lectured at the University of Guyana to all ethnic groups. And any student of any ethnic group will know one of the first things I did when I began to lecture at the university is say to them what they need to do to move from F to D, D to C, C to B, B to A. I give clear objective criteria for assessment. I believe if one sets out objective criteria, they are compelled to operate based on that criteria. And so I think my record at the University of Ghana would have established among all Guyanese that I was fair, ethnicity didn't come into the picture. I have half of my family that, or at least a quarter, that are of Indo-Guyanese descent. I've never had a problem with them. The others are Afro-Guyanese. For me, as a person, it is my task to represent all people. The problem you have is when you represent Afro-Guyanese, people tend to transform that into being race. But I would say this to you. I'm disposed to representing anyone. And as we go along and I explain to you the political situation in Guyana, you will see, based on my philosophical position, I will have to represent that section of the Indo-Guyanese community that is not benefiting from oil and gas in the way that it should. Now, there's no way I'm going to sit in Guyana as an Afro-Guyanese and allow this kind of thing to happen. Let me give you an example. One, if you look at the Suzdijk-Linden Highway, and I've asked the government to put out the figures if they are not afraid. Along the Suzdijk-Linden Highway, the PPP has given predominantly and overwhelmingly one ethnic group all the lands. Let's say we forgive them for that. We come now, the PPP said when they were in opposition that anybody who got land after the no confidence motion, the land will either be taken away or they will face the courts. The evidence is there that Indo-Guyanese got, Afro-Guyanese got. You proceed to court and you take only Afro-Guyanese to court. The Indo-Guyanese were left with the same lands that were gotten under us. Mind you, I believe they were entitled to it. What I disagree with is the different strokes for different folks. Now, I was called to Belwest and Wales, which are Indo-Guyanese communities. And the people there who got land that were Indo-Guyanese and perceived to be APNU AFC, they began to hassle them. In the case of a number of the Indo-Guyanese in that area, they have two accesses to the lands. One is through Wales Estate, which they instructed the security to close so that these Indo and Afro-Guyanese who are going through there can't. The other alternative is either through Belwest or Bel East, might be Bel East. They dug a canal so that they cannot get their machinery, etc., on the land. And therefore, to me, and I may put this in the public domain, it's a clear case of both ethnic and political discrimination.
And that's a serious charge. I mean, they will be going out of their way to dig a trench to avoid these.
And I raise it in the public domain in Guyana to rally, and the government does not respond to it. And so that is the concern. And, you know, sometimes when you are representing people, what they do is focus only on the Afro-Guyanese. But I went to Bush Lot in the quarantine, and the people there complained that there was a PPP activist, Indo-Guyanese, who destroyed the roads, destroyed the dams, and tell them in no uncertain terms, he has connections and they can do nothing. But nobody will highlight the fact that when I was there, I highlighted it and raised it in public domain. I went to Little Africa, where there were a lot of Indo-Guyanese living there, and Little India not far away. And I raised the question of discrimination against the African Guyanese there. I pointed out that a lot of the Indo-Guyanese came and met me and said nothing is being done in the community and it affects them. That was raised. Of course, the vice president in his style ran in there and said he was going to do roads, etc. Now, I give you another case. Only recently, the government announced that they will do they distribute in 284 contracts to do 300 roads in Region 6. In Region 10, which is an APN stronghold, they will do 25. They are not giving you the breakdown of the East Coast and Georgetown, so you know how much they'll do. But I believe people in the quarantine are entitled to good roads.
Well, I want to go back before we go straight. And there's so much I want to talk to you about. You talk about the wealth, the money that you read in the headlines even this morning. Don't you think it's the government or any government would need time to process the delivery of service and goods and infrastructure? I mean, the young government, within the short time they spent a lot of time wrestling out the results of the election, etc. Would it not be fair to say that they need more time in executing? And mind you, I have noticed since they came into power, as an outsider observing, it seems as if they were a government in training. As soon as they hit the ground running. Now, you're alleging that some areas of Guyana where maybe Afro-Guyanese might be living and not being properly represented as far as infrastructure, work, etc. What about proportion to population in these areas? Because I'm not from Guyana, and I'm asking you, for those who are listening, to help us with, because you talk a lot about numbers, if you could give us a little quick breakdown in your assessment. Is the government addressing across, because they're talking about one Guyana, and I mean, for them to be fair and want to stay in power, you would have to win the love at the hearts of the Afro-Guyanese as maintaining their hold on the Indo-Guyanese population. Are they not sharing this or distributing this wealth and work that is cascade down to all Guyanese?
Okay, let's answer that. The Region 4, which includes Georgetown, the East Coast and the East Bank, they constitute nearly half of the population. Now, if you're doing 300 roads in the quarantine, which constitute, I think, 72,000 people maximum, here you're talking about over 200,000. I'm just dealing with your population issue. When you move from the East Coast and Bank, you go to Georgetown. The single largest population in Georgetown is in Georgetown. But what the government says, and this was said only yesterday or day before yesterday by the Minister of Infrastructure, Wane Jill, that if Georgetown wants services, they must vote PPP. That is in the public domain. Now, apart from the fact that it is a callous comment, it is indicative of the approach. Now, Georgetown as a municipality should be given their subvention, given their resources to manage Georgetown, and the people who manage it be held accountable. Now, Georgetown is won by the APNUAFC. It has an Indo-Guyanese mayor, but they continue to deprive Georgetown of resources. They do the same thing with New Amsterdam. They do the same thing with Bartica. They do the same thing with Madia. All four that we would have won. May I also point this out? The government gave a $4 million to every NDC to clean up their area, to do work. The only NDCs that they didn't give the money to were those won by the APNUAFC. And then they proceeded to take that money, do what they want in the area, and then tell them the work was done. Now, if you believe in local government, you allocate resources to the local authorities who are elected, you allow them to manage, and as government, you hold them accountable. If one looks at the budgetary allocation, you will see that those controlled by the PPP obtain more resources disproportionate to the population. And so the data will substantiate what I'm saying. Now, I believe that all communities should benefit, but we have to move to the point where we have objective criteria for allocations. It cannot be at the whims, fancies, and caprices of a government that shows bias, and that is the concern. Now, on the question of they need in time, you do not need time to allocate resources fairly. You need time, yes, to implement your programs, etc. But you said that they hit the ground running. If they hit the ground running and they were prepared, the inverse proportion of that is that they were prepared to do just what they're doing. Because if they were prepared to govern in a fair way, then they didn't need time. They just had to do resource allocation in a fair way, and it will happen. I'll give you the last case, because I travel Guyana regularly. One of the things I pride myself is when I speak from the people. We had a flood, and there's flood relief. The quarantine is the PPP stronghold, the whole Region 6. But there's one community in Region 6, among others, that is predominantly Afro-Guyanese. It's a community called Barakara in the Kanji Creek, or some people say the Kanji River. Now, for flood relief, they sent in people to do assessments. In the Barakara, in the Kanji, they have established by the people in agriculture that the African Guyanese lost heads of cattle, they lost crop and other livestock. Under quarantine, they issued flood relief. It ranged from 250,000 up to 8 million. Now, in Barakara, where they went and did the assessment, they gave every person there $50,000. What that meant is the people who lost, and one particular man who lost 30 heads of cattle, cannot rebuild. And even under quarantine, I can tell you this, Indo-Guyanese who are not perceived to be PPP did not get what they were expected to get. And so there is an elite group in the PPP and family and friends that are benefiting, while a lot of the Afro-Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese, who they don't perceive to be supportive of them, are not getting the resources. Now, you say you are, one last one before you go. You say, yes, you cleared $664 billion going into Guyanese pocket, yet you refuse to raise the wages and salaries of those in the public sector. Now, it is not a case that you don't have money, is you have money, but we have got to recognize that one Guyana is talk I believe that we need to build a Guyana in which all Guyanese feel comfortable and all Guyanese believe they are benefiting from our national patrimony. And there is where the problem lies.
You mentioned the voters list. This list that you speak about, that need, and I like the idea about biometrics, has it not been the same list that your government has prepared and had so much issue sorting out the election? What is wrong with this list?
Now, first of all, let us remember the PPP called for a clean list after 2015. People tend to forget that. And they were annoyed with Dr. Suraj Bali, who was governing the commission by consensus. Now, having called for that, we as a government, and people don't mention this, we were doing house-to-house registration for a new clean voters list. The PPP went to court, and the Chief Justice ruled that you couldn't take the names of people off of the list. And that is why we end up going into the last election with a bloated list that suits the present government and opposition at the time. So we were moving in that direction. Now we are at the point where the government is saying that the law doesn't permit them to change it. And we're saying to them, it is we that make the laws, the government and the opposition. And this is an area we could collaborate on and make the changes to ensure we have a list, an electoral process, so that at the end of the next election, there will be no quorums. If you go to an election and you have biometrics, if you go to an election and you have a clean voters list, who would be able to contest the results if the election goes well? No one. And so if your interest is in the stability and development of Guyana, you will agree to a clean voters list and biometrics.
How would you propose that this list be compiled? Because in the past, you refused to meet on voting on appointment of key personalities or positions in the government of Guyana. What would you suggest as a mediated team maybe, or who could you pull together to make this list legitimate and doesn't have government or any interference as such?
Well, you will need government because in the final analysis, it is government that allocate the resources, etc. What is needed is for us to agree that there is need for a clean voters list. Then there are a number of ways you could clean the list. But the one that has been practiced in Guyana and has shown success is where there is house-to-house registration and every political party has a representative so that the persons that are registered are not persons decided by X or Y. It is decided by the Elections Commission and signed off on by the government and the opposition.
But that election commission is made up of government officials.
Yeah.
Would you not say that they would be influenced by the government, as your government has been accused of?
Look, if the election commission function in the way it should, it will be 3 for government, 3 for opposition.
So let's start there. Would it not seem fair to say to shake up that institution?
It is, well, you have 2 options. You can have a chairman like Steve Suraj Bali did, who did not become involved in the political fight. He took time, energy, and skill and had the parties resolve the issues in the best way they could and avoid voting on certain political issues. In the present circumstance, the Election Commission chairman always votes with the PPP. And so that kind of arbiter, independent arbiter between the 2 political forces have been removed. I believe if you can put that back, you're in a better position. And so there are mechanisms that we can use to clean the voters list, to improve the integrity of the electoral system, and to ensure we have election results so that by the time we are through, we all can find it acceptable and can move forward without tension. The reality in Guyana is, and that is why I've always been an advocate for changes in the system. The reality of Guyana is when the APNU-AFC or the PNC is in power, Indo-Guyanese feel excluded, and vice versa. And so, while these are electoral processes to give you the outcome of elections, they do not solve the fundamental problem, the problem of governance in Guyana, which is what we need to move to solve once in government.
Well, in the past, we have seen not only in Guyana, but even in Trinidad and Tobago, where they pretty much had a style of divide and rule. You being a political student, that has been a technique used by many governments, especially when they have a large ethnic group and divide. Going to the polls, I don't think anyone could really survive politically with just one ethnic makeup. You might have been accused, the PPP might have been accused on the other side. You were part of a coalition government. And you have always advocated for coalition and working together. Would you see yourself sitting at the table to discuss being part of a PPP, your political party working together with government, like we have seen in places like Germany and others?
Yes, if it is in the context of good governance. You can become involved in engaging in government, but there has to be political maturity and an understanding of the issues you have to deal with. I am not going to go engaging unless we have some clear parameters. One, a clear vision for Guyana. Two, a plan. And in that plan, we must agree on the things that all of us want to see. For instance, I do not believe in Guyana that projects over a certain amount of money, the decision should be made only by the incumbent government. And on obtaining government, one of the things I will do, and I've said this publicly, is for us to sit and decide the major projects should have some amount of consensus so that when the government changes, you can continue. But if you have a situation in which a government makes decisions on major projects, right now we are talking about a pipeline in which there hasn't been enough discussions, there hasn't been agreement, and therefore, without proper feasibility study and discussion on it, it's likely to end up the same way Amalia Falls end up. I hope not.
But you have been in a position to debate this publicly in Parliament, at least giving opposition consensus, as you spoke about. But your absence and absence of your colleague, wouldn't that be a waste of time? I mean,
well, first of all, we have been in Parliament all the time. The only time we didn't go to Parliament is the last sitting before the National Assembly went into recess. And the reason we didn't go was because they suspended 8 of our members of Parliament without giving them a right to a hearing, which the law prescribes. And so we have been in Parliament. We debated the question of insurance and put our information out there. We have debated many of these issues. But I don't want us to overstate Parliament. They say in the Parliament loud for everybody to hear. You will have your say and we will have our way. Now, if a Parliament isn't responsive to the opposition concerns, then it is really not a Parliament in the true sense of a democratic institution. And that is where the problem lies.
and you know, I must say this. Every government needs to function properly and be held accountable, and a stronger opposition, I would say, hold the government to task. You have been articulating, listening to you, hearing you from News Songbite, one who is doing a good job at that. But in the absence of being in Parliament and spending your time protesting outside the Parliament, isn't that defeating the purpose of our opposition?
But I've said to you, we have been in Parliament all the time. But you know something this world doesn't know? From the time there's going to be a Parliament, the Ghana government blocks off about 800 yards on both sides, so nobody protesting can get in front of the Parliament. If you're Trinidadian, as you know, it's a right to go in front of the Parliament and protest. The present government puts up barriers, policemen, and it is difficult to get close. And whenever you get close is when you beat the the barriers and get in there. So it's not a case, you see, people make the assumption that Ghana is a democratic society functioning in the way Trinidad would function or Barbados. Ask any government official if it is not true that from the time Parliament or any protest is going to be held, the government blocks off so that you can't get in, and policemen say to the people, no, you can't get past here.
Mr. Norton, I have so much to talk to you. I'm enjoying this conversation, but there's so much I want to touch on. So let's back up a little bit, if you don't mind. There are widespread allegations of government corruption, including in the police force. How would President Norton address corruption in the government? And while you answer that, you have been fighting for wage increases for the public servants, and you also made claims that the sugar industry has been receiving more than their fair share compared to the government workers who are the frontline workers, etc. How would you address corruption in government and more so in the police?
Let me first clarify what you've said. One, we have been championing the cause of all workers having increased wages and salaries. When it comes to the sugar workers, when we were in government, we were downsizing the sugar estates and putting resources into finding alternative opportunities for the sugar workers. It was capitalized upon as if you were just putting 7,000 workers out of a job. Now, our argument is, and I think it's generally accepted, that the sugar industry is not going to be viable as is. And talking about opening the estates are not a viable option. We need to downsize sugar. And rather than putting $13 billion a year into talking about opening the sugar industry, we can utilize that money to develop programs that allow sugar workers to get alternative forms of employment. Let us not forget, when the quota system was going from sugar, the EU provided the then PPP government with endless money to deal with this situation. They wasted some of it on a Skeldon sugar factory that there was no proper feasibility study, and they knew was going to end up in problems. And so one of the things that escaped people is that a good bit of the sugar factories were closed under the PPP. And having closed them, they didn't prepare alternatively for the workers. They then did Skeldon, which consumed millions of dollars and became a white elephant. Now, what would I do different? First, I think one has to accept that all Guyanese deserve equal treatment. And that even with that, there are inequities in the society. And we have to deal with inequities. One of the first things that has to be done is a proper assessment of poverty, where the poverty lies, and then develop policies and then programs to target the poverty and to bring relief and alleviate the poverty through small businesses, micro businesses, and other approaches. Then you also have got to look to create employment in communities. And I've been arguing consistently, if you keep throwing handouts and claiming you're going to bring down the cost of living, it says that you are not serious. It is well known in this world that inflation, if you throw money and there isn't a concomitant or accompanying production, you will have very little goods with plenty money, and that will fuel the high cost of living. So the government itself is fueling the high cost of living. We recommended to them through me at a press conference that you cannot just throw this cash grant. You have to put resources into developing agriculture and ensuring that there are enough goods in the market so that people can access those goods. If you have little goods and plenty money, the price goes up. And the government approach to inflation is fueling inflation. And we have made that point. So one of the first things we will have to do is to take measures to deal with inflation, not just throw in resources. We believe our people need assistance, but it must be structured, aimed at eradicating or attenuating poverty and allowing people to develop. That's the first point. As it relates to corruption, I believe you lead the way in corruption from the top. I've made it very clear that I've never been in corruption. I have no intention of being corrupt. And therefore, it is our view in the AP and UAFC that once we can provide leadership that is not corrupt, we can move Ghana forward. Of course, I'm cognizant of the fact that when you're in opposition, people will say they ain't going to be corrupt, but when they see it, then the government head has to deal with it. And I will be prepared to deal with it. Because if you allow corruption to creep in at the top, then you cannot stop it at the bottom. Anyone who wants to be fair would recognize that corruption reduced under Desmond Hoyt. And he lived his life and was never accused of being corrupt. Then came the PPP in the first phase with Dr. Jagan, and in the 1997 to 99 period while Dr. Jagan was there wasn't accusations of corruption, and Ghana was going in a particular direction. Then came Barra Jackdale and a new PPP that was extremely corrupt. And as that regime became more and more corrupt, they began to criminalize the state. Because when you are corrupt, you have to use the police politically to protect the corrupt elite. And so we find ourselves in Ghana in a position where you have a government that is corrupt. Tell me in which democratic country you will have recordings like those that were done by the Vice News, in which there are serious allegations of bribery and corruption against the vice president. In any democratic society, he would have been asked to resign, or he would have been fired, or at minimum, taken off of duty for there to be a proper investigation. The government has responded by protecting Barra Jackdale against these allegations of corruption and bribery. So by the very act, they are saying to people, encourage it. Now, I want to go to a particular incident that occurred before I finish on corruption. Before we left, while the PPP was in government, they started to put CCTV cameras. While we were in government, Georgetown became inundated with these cameras. You had a high-profile murder. I'm not saying who murdered, I don't know. But you have this murder. A policeman contends that the videos showed one thing, and he had his outburst. The government had said at the time that these cameras weren't working. All of us know they were working, because we have seen other incidents where when there isn't a government elite criminal link, the videos work and those people are brought to justice. But when it is the government, its elite friends and families, for some reason, this technology doesn't work. So even with technology, if you don't have the political will and an interest in eradicating corruption, then you wouldn't succeed. We will show the political will to, regardless of who it is, once they are in violation of law, they should be dealt with. The reality is you need to have the rule of law. And one of the things I'm prepared to do is to adhere and live by the rule of law. I do believe since my student days, it is always better to be ruled by law than by man. Of course, that will demand us doing a lot of work to insulate the judicial system from corrupt people. Don't let us fool ourselves. Guyana has under 1 million people, and everybody knows everybody, and therefore it can be easily corruptible. So you have to put mechanisms in place to ensure that they aren't corruptible.
Well, there's so much again on that, and corruption and crime and criminality. Simply from the salaries that is earned by police and high officials, you can't pay them next to nothing and expect the drug lords and having a thoroughfare through Guyana and other places and having them look the other way. So it's easy. But again, there's so much I would like to address, and I'm sure, and I'm saying this, we will, of course, have a transcript of this program provided. And of course, we are hoping we would get a rebuttal from the PPP civic government if they're listening, or any of the supporters. We are not reaching out to anyone, but if they have the political will. We have a couple of ministers are here in Toronto. I had sent out an invitation, and that invitation still stands if they would like to come out to the program and bring some goodwill and explain why they're here even. And I haven't heard. In fact, I heard that they were busy. So I am giving the opportunity equally to both sides, and anyone that would like to come and rebut what Mr. Norton is challenging, we are opening it up and letting our listeners know that that will be. Election. With the windfall of the oil money that is flowing, any government would have in their purse a lot to spend, a lot to do, to bring about one Guyana, to share equally among or throughout Guyana. Guyana is a small place when you look at the population and the kind of wealth we are talking about, the amount of money that's coming in, but that is pretty much controlled by the government. How would you intend, and I heard that you were thinking about there might be an early election because the government might be willing to take that risk and call an early election. How you intend to face the population and the polls without resources to fight a big purse like that with a government who is doing supposedly the right thing? The other thing I want to ask you is that moving forward, the Alliance for Change, the leader, Mr. Ramjatan, will not join with the APNU as a team to fight the 2025 election. Without his support for the AFC and the APNU, would you be able to win enough seats for government?
Well, first of all, I don't know that Mr. Ramjatan said he would not be joining with the AFC. I know there are some issues that are under consideration and that there are some people in the AFC who believe they should go their way. Mr. Ramjatan has never said that to me. We've been working, we have been cooperating. So I think the AFC so far has not said that they will go at the end of the year, but people put it however they want. That apart, you know, a lot of times people believe success is solely dependent on money. Let's go to 2015. We couldn't challenge the PPP budget, and we won. There's a famous thinker who said that the thing that beats money most is organization. And we intend to work assiduously to put the organization in place to beat the PPP. May I also say this to you? If you do an analysis of the Guyanese society today, you will see all this oil money going in. But the critical question is this money trickling down to the people of Guyana? And the answer is no. If you go to any community outside the gated, elite, rich communities, people's major concern of all ethnic groups is the high cost of living and the fact that they are not getting resources. That is the critical issue. Now, what do you have in Guyana? You have a lot of resources going into the society. They put it at 64 billion going into the people's pockets. But if you look at Facebook this morning, Guyanese of all ethnic groups were saying, this money is not meeting us. You know, it is important to note that there's the re-emergence of a classist society in Guyana. In Guyana today, you have a large percentage of Amerindians that are in poverty, a large percentage of African Guyanese that are in poverty, a large percentage of Indo-Guyanese that are in poverty. A lot of times we talk and say Guyana has a lot of resources, but what matters, is who are benefiting from the resources. We are going to point out to the people of Guyana continuously that they are not benefiting, and as a government, we are going to govern Guyana in a way that the people benefit. Indo-Guyanese, Afro-Guyanese, Indigenous, Chinese, you name them. And that for us is critical because people want to benefit in a direct way.
Would you encourage or try to quiet down protests, as we have seen in the past, where people were dissatisfied and burning tires and blocking roads and stuff like that? Would you encourage that type of protest, or would you try to bring calm so that they could at least protest in a more organized civil way?
Protests can take a number of forms. And I do understand some of the dangers of street protests. But I do believe that we will have to have organized street protests, because one of the problems with this government is that they do not reason. They do not believe in a politics of meeting, finding compromise, and then consensus. And so some amount of political pressure would have to be brought to bear. In bringing it, however, we will carry out a campaign, and we have started that. We keep saying to people, we are not in opposition to Indo-Guyanese. We are opposition to the ills of the government, the fact that they are autocratic and they are not governing in the interest of the people. We have to get that message out, and we have to ensure that in protesting, we do not provide the opportunity for the PPP to use it and create ethnic instability. I want you to go back through the tape after Quindon Bacchus was murdered, and you will see that African Guyanese were coming down the road, protesting peacefully, and when they arrive at Monrepo, it's where the problems start. And we are aware that a particular PPP operative out of Buxton played a role, because when you look at the tape, you will see Indo-Guyanese joined in. And then out of the blues, there was an attack on Indo-Guyanese, which we condemned. Now, I want to remind people, there's a small Indian population in Linden. And when we campaign against the electricity, one of the first things we said is this is not an ethnic struggle. The Indo-Guyanese in Linden are Guyanese, and none of them should be attacked. And none of them, not one person was attacked. We have to carry the struggle, recognizing that the PPP, particularly those of Barajak-Dio ilk, would like to use an opportunity to instigate ethnic tension, which will serve them and wouldn't serve us. So we're going to carry out our work in a sensible way that allows us to appeal across the board, while at the same time not giving the PPP the opportunity to misuse a peaceful protest to achieve narrow partisan objectives.
In the past, we have seen many great political leaders in Guyana. The late Dr. Chadi Jagan and the opposition of that time, they were civil, they were cordial to each other. You protest by not shaking the president's hand. Is it a representation of the office holder or the office that you're refusing to shake?
It is a representation of the fact that the people I represent are being oppressed and not given the opportunity. And if you are the person that has responsibility to ensure that that doesn't happen, the place for me to protest is at you.
Well, we want to give, again, we have promised, and I want to do that before we wrap up. Anyone listening would like to make a call and speak to our guests, please call now, 416-848-7772, 416-848-7772. And today, my guest is Mr. Aubrey Norton, leader of the People's National Congress Reform, the PNCR, and he was elected to position in 2021. Again, 416, the lines are open, 848-7772. 416-848-7772. I'm waiting for your calls. We don't screen calls, so please feel free to call now. So while we wait for anyone who would like to call, again, wanted to ask you, what was, do you think the breaking of the mace in Parliament was justified? And why do you think the suspension of the members of Parliament were unjustified? These are a couple of questions that were...
All right, let me start first of all with the mace.
I have a call on that question, so
yeah.
we can do that. Let's see. Hello, hi, are you live on air? Who we have on the line? Hello? Hello? Okay, you're on. We could, anybody there? 1 second, let me just see. Hello? Okay, so listen, we would try again. So go ahead with your answer.
Yes, I was saying, first of all, there was a process before arriving there. We were saying to the government, let this bill go to a special select committee so that there will be wide participation. Let us recall that many people in civil society did not support the Natural Resource Fund in the way the government put it over. Now, the issue was being debated. A request was made for it to go to a special select committee. The government refused to listen. Remember, this is a matter of national concern. This is a matter that will determine how the resources of our country will be distributed. I believe in frustration, persons decided that the way to go is to remove the mace based on the thing that if the mace isn't there, then they can't proceed. The government, of course, finds some small mace and said they proceeded. Now, let's put that apart. Let's assume that the members of Parliament were wrong. The AP and UFC brought similar charges against one Ejil. They were allowed to represent themselves, come with a lawyer.
Hold the line, okay?
Now, the Constitution of Guyana provides, the laws of Guyana provide for anyone who is accused to have a hearing, to be represented by counsel. But here you suspend 8 persons without a hearing. On what basis? So the rejection is for the violation of the law and the Constitution. I'm not saying they were right, I'm not saying they were wrong, but I'm saying that as a matter of course, every Guyanese has the right to be heard and to be defended by counsel, and that was deprived.
Okay, so let's try the phone call one more time. We have a caller. Hi, who we have on the line?
The name is Mikhail Rodriguez.
How are you, sir?
Okay.
You have a question?
So
Go ahead.
My question to opposition leader, Mr. Norton. He just spoke about Guyanese being oppressed, his supporters being oppressed, and there's a reason for not, shaking the president's hands and so on. And obviously it would suggest that the government is very oppressive of Mr. Norton's supporters, the people who he represent. But as Mr. Norton speaks, Vice President Jagdeo is delivering 150,000 cash grants that was promised by the president to persons who are of Indian, African, Amerindian descent. And so one begs the question as to who exactly is being oppressed, and if Mr. Norton could just give a few instances of individuals who are oppressed, even if it's just to highlight so the government could make amends if this
okay, first of all,
exists.
Like we have said to all Guyanese, you must accept the money because it is taxpayers' money. And so Mr. Jagdeo giving out the money, in fact, is giving out the people's money. But let me ask, the public servants who are predominantly Afro-Guyanese are living below the poverty line. If you are serious about helping the Afro-Guyanese community, helping the public service, then you have the resources to increase the salary of public servants. We said to the government that, look, we need to be giving our people what is called a minimum livable income. You do an assessment, and if it is 200,000, you raise the wages and salaries of those people to that level. When you give a crash grant of 150,000, it probably lasts 2 months, if so much, and the people are back to square one. If you, in a structured way, raise their salaries, you are improving their lives. In addition to which, you are putting them on a higher threshold for pension. And so, to give handouts at the expense of genuine wage increases and genuine policies and programs to deal with poverty, I consider that to be farcical and not to be an interest in the people of Guyana. Now, you're saying all of these $1 billion are being extended. Check to see how much of that is going to low-income people, including Indians who are in poverty, Amerindians who are in poverty. If you adopt the policy of giving people a fish, you create dependency. If you teach them to fish, you're creating the basis for sustainable communities. One of my fundamental problems with the government approach is that it does not seek to create sustainable communities. It seeks to give out these handouts, maintain people in poverty. It becomes a means of domination and control that you can use when you want. And when it comes to discrimination, I want to point out a quick case. The president went to Pigeon Island, which is predominantly Indo-Guyanese. They are squatters. He said to them, we are going to regularize your land. He then goes to the people in Mocha and said to them, and they are squatters on ancestral lands, says to them, we'll bulldoze them. Up to yesterday, they were breaking down houses in Mocha. Now tell me why on earth we must sit down and allow you to regularize, and we believe they should be regularized. I have no problem with that. But then when it comes to a predominantly, an African Guyanese community, you decide the ways to go is to bulldoze them and to remove them out of the path of the East Bank Highway. Now, mind you, this East Bank Road is already allocated. The people there are not in the way of the road, but yet you're seeking to move them. And when you see the people who they are seeking to give the lands to, you know it is PPP close people and cronies. That is unjust.
The caller made.
Yeah, I'm
If I might ask you to just expound a little more, if you might expound a little more on the same area of discussion just before, as it relates to the resources that the government has, that you would wish for them to use more wisely for the public servants as it relates to raise a pay for the public servants. Aren't these the same resources that your administration only 2 years ago would have had and did not do same?
Could I answer you? First of all, under the APNU AFC, public service salaries increased by 77%. That meant that, and mind you, at the time we weren't accessing oil resources. We did not have one budget that accessed oil resources. Remember, after the no confidence motion, there was no budget. We ran Guyana for 2 years without a budget and without oil resources. So it is not true to say we had the same resources. But let me help you out. The PPP put in the last budget $5 billion for public servants. Until now, they have not distributed. You know what they will do? They will wait till the end of the year and say, we're giving you this $5 billion, which was budgeted for in January. And in real terms, you wouldn't be able to give the public servants what they need. Let us note that since the PPP came to government, they give 7% in all, which works out to 3.5% per year. Now, 3.5% on a poor salary is ridiculous. Mind you, ministers of government, senior government officials will get 3.5% on a high salary. which means they will get more. So we need to be very careful with what we're saying. There is money there, 5 billion, that should have been given. An assessment should have been done, and then it should have been topped up based on the needs of the people at this stage. So I want to make it clear, it is not true that we had oil money to distribute. And secondly, the government has the oil money, but it is not going to the people of Guyana. I invite you to go to Guyana. Don't worry any of the two political parties. Talk to the average poor person, regardless of ethnicity, and hear what they will say.
But caller, thank you very much. And if I can give somebody else a chance.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. 416-848-7772. Again, the numbers, we take a couple more calls. 416-848-7772. I want to thank that caller for calling in. The caller alluded to the fact that you represented your people, in inverted commas there. You never corrected them. Do you agree with representing a certain sector or all guys?
Well, you would recall very early in the program, I mentioned villages that I went to and represented people. I mentioned the chaps at Wales. But, you know, people have the tendency to see and hear what they want to hear. You know, the late Desmond Hoyt used to tell us a story. He said there was these journalists who went to see this man walk on water. And this king carried him out and said, I will walk on the water. And he proceeded to walk on the water. You know what was the headline the next day by the journalists? He can't swim.
Hi, who we have on the line? You have a question?
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, and please state your name and if you have a question.
No, I'm not giving my name, but I would like to tell Mr. Norton that I am an Afro-Guyanese. I traveled from here to Guyana for the past 3 months and went, and he should have been ashamed of himself to say what he's saying there. Because when he was in power, he didn't do nothing for us. And this government is helping everybody.
I can tell you are not Afro-Guyanese, but I can tell you are not Afro-Guyanese, so I wouldn't bother. I will just ignore it.
You should. When you was there for all these years, what did you do for us?
I can answer
Nothing.
that. I can answer that.
Let me proceed to answer it. I just said to you that the public service is predominantly Afro-Guyanese, and there were the equivalent of 77.7% increase in salaries. That's the first thing. Now, the government says that we did nothing, we didn't employ Afro-Guyanese, but they were able to fire more than 1,005. So how didn't we do anything if you had Afro-Guyanese in the public service to fire? You said we didn't do anything for Afro-Guyanese. Now, the government is taking back lands from Afro-Guyanese who got lands while we were in government. How is it you find lands to take back? How is it you find people, Afro-Guyanese, to carry to court to take these lands when you say that you didn't have any? May I point out to you that not one African Guyanese village could have planted when we came to power in 2015 because all the backlands were not drained and irrigated. The APNU AFC put the RAIDS program in place, which drained those backlands, irrigated them, and many African Guyanese communities returned to farming. May I tell you, you can go to Victoria, you can go to Nabaklis, you could go to a number of them and get agricultural produce out of them. So what the government did, or the then opposition, is create this perception that nothing was done for Afro-Guyanese. And may I say this to you, because we were taking a balanced approach. When we were doing roads in the quarantine, we did an Indo-Guyanese village, we did an Afro-Guyanese village. We shared the resources across the country. So what I will admit is that we did not do as much as we should have done. But that was also a function of David Grange and the APNU AFC attempting to be fair across the country.
And that charge could be laid on both sides of the government. Because I've heard even right now some similar situation where some Indo-Caribbean, Indo-Guyanese are being felt as if they're being left out and opposed to supporting and giving to the Afro-Guyanese. This Indo-Afro-Guyanese thing, I think it has to start from the top, people like yourself. you have been part of a coalition, and I must say, to manage that coalition and where we saw where it fell apart simply by one person crossing the aisle or making a vote, I must say that you have been able to structure that government and stay in power. And there's what, 2 seats shy of the government?
Well, it's one really.
I mean,
yeah.
And I mean, so I think Guyana politics is very healthy, and we could go on for hours here with this program. I want to take one more call, and I'll give you a few minutes to wrap up and address all Guyanese after this call. And again, we're asking you, if you're calling, please at least give us a name. We don't have to give your last name. We're not trying to identify so Mr. Norton can address you as Richard or Mr. Smith or whatever, right? And try not to be disrespectful. Hi, who we have on the line? You have a question? Hello? Hi, you have a question? What's your name? And go ahead with your question.
Anna.
Okay.
My question will be, what is in place or what's the plan for the homeless person and orphanages in Guyana?
Well, let me say this to you. Guyana needs a complete social services plan. Since we have had the NIS, there hasn't been a comprehensive approach to social services. We have to, in our attempts to deal with poverty, one of the areas we'll have to deal with is the homeless as well as those orphans. And you have to identify them, identify the problems, and come up with solutions to deal with them. For instance, I am of the view that we underutilize our social workers. We need to train some more and use them in orphanages to meet out to children and the management there and run them in a professional way that allows a child to move from being an orphan in a home to a well-developed, rounded child that can go out on their own and make life. As it relates to the homeless, we need again to look at the homeless, analyze the situation, and then come up with ways and means, mechanisms, including homes for them to stay. But it should not be done to encourage dependence. It has to be done in a way that you allow these people to get shelter, to get a home, but there must also be a plan to move them out of shelters and let them develop independent lives in a sustainable way, meaning that they can either get employment or business and move on. I am not opposed to social services, but I am opposed to social services that allow a situation in which people are not moving towards independence. I believe in independence. And whatever we do in the orphanage and social services and the homeless must be to create the avenues for them to become independent and self-serving, dignified and respectable individuals.
Well, part of your answer is that we have to look at it. Have not been looked at that situation in your government time? I mean, this is an ongoing problem, and suicide is... I will admit
that when it comes to the homeless, I don't think much was done to deal with the homeless. In fact, I believe we have to put it in focus and come up with proper ways of dealing with it. Regularly, I pass Regent Street, turning into my favorite liming spot, and you see endless people living on the pave while the government speaks of having million. And it predated the government. It has only increased in recent times. So I believe it is something that we have to tackle as part of a social service development program.
Having such an important public figure in our studios today, I believe in this. I've been talking about it on television for many years. I just asked if you could give us 2 minutes on your thoughts on the suicide rate in Guyana. This is a curse that has been long under address. If you could bring some attention to that.
Well, it is high. There is no one cause of it. Economics will be one cause. The desire for domination, particularly in the male-female issue, the desire for domination. I think we also have got to work on self-esteem. And we need a program to say to people, life is better. You know, I always remember the story where this man was rowing over the fact that he didn't have a shoe. And he went walking up the road and he saw a man without legs and he changed his position. We have got to orient people to understand that life is better, and we have to put programs in place. The police force is critical. You cannot have a police force that is strictly law enforcement. Somebody goes to the police with a complaint and it isn't treated with the seriousness. And that is because there is a lack of education. Some amount has been done, but there's a lack of education. While we were in government, I was calling for social workers in schools, in police stations, etc. One of the problems we face is that we train policemen to enforce law. We train teachers to teach, but the people that are coming into the system have social problems. And unless we put mechanisms in place to deal with the social problems, including suicide, that is a problem. I know of a case where a child was talking about suicide. You know why? Because that child feels they didn't get the grade that the parents wanted them to get. So we also have got to remove some of those pressures that we put on people to succeed and to achieve. We have to find ways of saying, yes, you must succeed and achieve, but one failure is not the end at all. Many people who succeeded after sometimes 3, 4, 5 failures. And so we need a comprehensive approach to the question.
Well, friends, we are coming up close to, we take one more caller. Caller, if you would hold the line, one more caller before we continue. We've shared a lot of time with Mr. Norton today.
And I'm thankful for it.
And there are many topics we could go on. I mean, I had a question about the National Resource Fund bill, and I don't want to get started with that. There's so much. We could go on for hours and days with this because we could go back and forth.
I promise you the next time I return, I will be at your disposal.
And you know, I am saying today again, we are hoping that someone in government could come on the program to rebut if they have any disagreement with what you said. I feel honored to give you the opportunity. And of course, this is not the first time we have done this. And I take pride in sharing your thoughts today. So before we leave, I want to give you a chance to speak to all Guyanese that might be listening. But let's take this caller. Okay. We'll give you a couple minutes. I don't know if we lost you, but please feel free to call back. 416-848-7772. I'm taking one more caller. 416-848-7772. And again, for all our advertisers and listeners who normally would, we would gaff and have a good time. Well, this is an important topic, an important gentleman. If in wrapping up, if you could tell anyone who would like to speak to you off air, if you have any event taking place that they could come out to, if you'd like to share that information also, feel free, and how they could engage you and your party groups in the city that you might be visiting, whether it's Canada, New York, Toronto, wherever it might be.
Well, we have an activity here in Toronto. I must submit, I'm not a person who walk around with paper, and so I don't remember the name, the venue, but I know there's a branch which I'm supposed to address and to speak to Guyanese on it. I'll probably get Lindsay to get it to you, okay, and so you can advertise it. But I must submit that I don't have it at my disposal because I have no paper or anything with me. The second thing I want to say is that I want to say this to all Guyanese. We need to observe a trend that is occurring in Guyana, a trend in which a ruling elite is benefiting maximally from the resources of Guyana. And therefore, we're developing a classist system in which a small group benefits, but a wide majority of the Guyanese people aren't. And I want to say to all and sundry that my focus will be on working with all Guyanese and working to remove that barrier and ensure that all Guyanese benefit and that we contribute to the reduction in poverty and hopeful the final eradication and creating a society in which all Guyanese feel comfortable and they believe they have a stake in the national cake. I don't believe we can run a society in which there are different strokes for different folks. And so the intention is to engage, to work with everyone, to build a wider coalition, and to place Guyana on the road to the rule of law, good governance, and a system that is accountable, transparent, and based on equity. That will be my message to Guyanese, and I hope at some stage I will be able to flesh out those as we go along.
Well,
and let me also say thanks again. It was a pleasure speaking with you. It's a pleasure engaging the Guyanese and the Caribbean community. And like I said before, I will be disposed to meeting. I'm one who believes that there will always be disagreements, but we can manage them and come out on top as a united people.
I want to say thank you very much again. You've been a very gracious host, and we look forward to hearing from you again. In closing, I just want to say those of you who are listening and have access to the PPP Civic, if you are in any disagreement with what was said today on today's program, we will be able to give you an equal opportunity to debunk it and to rebut. So again, my number 416-832-7293. 416-832-7293. Lindsay, I want to say thank you for having our guest here today and time, and thank you very much, Mr. Norton.
Thanks for having me. Nice speaking with you as well.
This is Shopdom Radio. As we continue, we will be right back after this short commercial break.
Caribbean Showtime, embracing and celebrating diversity. For many, the journey of our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean has been a search for a new home, where opportunities abound, where migrants from every country around the world find a new beginning, a new career, a new and better life. A place where their hard work and contribution to this great country will pay off for generations to come. And although they may be from uniquely different islands, Caribbean Showtime is proud to represent them all by celebrating diversity with programs like Connecting with Culture, Pillars of the Community, Local Talent on Parade, What's Cooking, Caribbean Sunshine, documentaries, news and sports, religious programming, and much more. Celebrating, sharing, and uniting our vibrant community. CSTV, connecting the Caribbean diaspora.